Steve Ross and Kevin Ross here with Mage Tower Creations. Again, please like and subscribe. I'm going to say that at the start of every video. We are going to be reviewing the classes here for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Was it 13 classes, Kevin?
Yep.
And just basically telling you, Kevin's going to do a little bit more of the rankings. I'm just going to tell you some parts that I like or dislike. We're going to give our opinion. Hopefully you find it interesting. Kev, start us off.
So we're going in alphabetical order, which means we are starting with the newest of the classes, the Artificer. Both of us have not had as much experience with this one, being a little bit of a newer one. We've not played it ourselves or seen it played, but as the first time I read it, I thought it was a little bit on the weaker side, but then rereading over it, I think it actually has a lot of charm to it and a lot of interesting niche things that it can do. An overall pretty well-balanced, middle-of-the-road class. The subclass design is very good. It's not particularly good at any one thing. It's a little bit more of a jack of all trades. It's a little bit good at a whole bunch of different things, and that might not be for everyone's play style. And it's more of a support role. It doesn't deal as much damage or have high AC, which I think beginners might not like it as much. So I think it's a little bit more for more experienced players that have played a bit more rather than newbie players, such as it has spell casting, but it's not a full spellcaster, despite being more of a spellcaster than the Paladin and the Ranger.
Because it gets cantrips.
Yeah, and the cantrips do make a big difference.
They do.
But if you go in thinking that it's a full spellcaster, not really realizing it, you might be a little disappointed.
It's more of a martial with some spellcasting.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays, all the classes, they have access to so many extra spells through different subclasses and other features, but its spell list is a little restrictive. If you really look through it, it's not as thick. But overall, pretty decent. What's your opinion on the Artificer?
The thing I like about the Artificer, it's funny we were talking about this, is it kind of feels like it's dependent on your DM and the campaign. If you're in, one of the unique features it gets is being able to attune to more magical items. But unfortunately, you don't get that until 10th level or higher, I believe. And so the problem is, as the data says, most people aren't playing that high. So that feature, while cool, doesn't come up a lot. The only difference would be, if you got that earlier. But again, I don't know that would matter because I don't think a lot of people get a ton of magic items early on unless you have a very magic item liberal DM. It does give you the ability to create your own magical items and give those out to your party. That is very cool.
But again, not very newbie friendly. I think that might get a little confusing. Who needs what works best for people? So definitely,
I don't think you're giving people enough credit.
Maybe.
But the problem is, I think the Artificer honestly is like a DM hedge. If you get a DM that doesn't give you a lot of items or doesn't alter the items out of the campaign to match the party, if you have an Artificer, you can get around that, and you can make sure that your party's equipped with good items that fit their character model, which again may upset the DM.
Yeah.
I also think that the Battle Medic was a good subclass. I like the Steel Companion. I thought that was a good mechanic. They got extra attack. They got better armor. That seemed more well-rounded. You can kind of hang in on the front with, say, a fighter, a paladin, a ranger, even a monk. The other one was the Artillerist, where there was some combinations, I thought, where you can stack it up and be shooting and do pretty decent damage, being able to have multiple little cannons that shoot off. So I thought that one was pretty strong. The other subclasses, they didn't super impress me. Thematically, I liked the kind of Iron Man one, the power suit one, but I know you mentioned you saw something that people think was really great. It didn't stand out to me to be particularly amazing. So
overall, of the 13 classes, I gave it. I ranked it number 6 of the 13, which is really
kind of
dead in the middle.
As middle as you can get for.
I think that's pretty fair.
Yeah.
Next up is the Barbarian. I always wish that they gave this a different name. It's the one class I wish they'd rename more than the Paladin or the Monk.
You don't like Barbarian?
I think it implies a class, and it's not. It's more of where they come from than what they do. Barbarian's more of a background than a class.
I can see that.
But
you'd rather have something kind of like Berserker.
Yeah, Again,
like
you've had nobles that are berserkers.
Absolutely.
So for the Barbarian, they're very simple in what they do. They get mad. They like to hit stuff. I think that the Reckless attack ability is one of the most interesting abilities in the game, to be honest.
I think it's a great ability. I think it's a very strong ability. I think it's a very fun ability because even though it provides a very impactful advantage,
yeah.
It does come with a drawback of disadvantage, and so there is some risk with it. I like the action economy that doesn't cost any action to use, so it's very flexible to use. I think that's one of the better features, both thematically and mechanically, in the entire game.
Yeah, and I've seen some people say they use it every single time they attack, which is fair. But I think there's a lot of people that will be a little more careful where they use it when they need it, and then they hold back when it's not so much their advantage, or they can get advantage through a different means. So
See,
I think it puts interesting choice in the player's hands of do you use it or do you not use it.
mhm.
And for some people, it is right to use it every single time. But for others, it gives you that interesting tactical thing when being the mindless rage machine. So
I think it depends a little bit on your DM and the rules. If
Yes.
your DM goes with flanking and allows advantage for flanking, could probably come from more of a third edition, fourth edition type of mindset, then the only time you wouldn't use reckless attack is if you could move and flank. And in that case, then your barbarian should pretty much always have advantage on their attacks, which with bounded accuracy, again, is a huge advantage.
So the other big feature is the rage ability, and this might seem a little kind of weird, but I actually feel very mixed bag on rage. I think it's almost a little strange how it's a little bit more of a defensive ability than offensive.
Mhm.
You do get more damage and stuff,
You do get some more damage,
but the amount of damage that you can tank and resist is the bigger draw of
Yes.
the feature,
absolutely.
which is very fun and cool, but thematically it almost seems a little weird sometimes. With reckless being you take on more damage, and
Mhm.
rage is you can prevent more damage.
You almost feel like there should be a different class ability that is more damage focused, where it's like you gain other bigger damage or something.
I wish more of the subclasses had different abilities to modify their rages. Like this subclass gives you a rage that's more defensive. This one gives you one that lets you do like elemental damage. And
Right.
some of the subclasses
Some
have
do.
that, but I think they could have went a little bit further with rage to kind of customize it a little bit more and give it a bit
My
more
criticism
things.
of rage is if you don't attack someone or take damage, you fall out of the rage. And the wording in the book of like since you last attacked, I think can sometimes be a little confusing, particularly for new players. And I think it's overly complex. I think it'd be simpler to just say, look, you get mad for the next minute, and you're in a rage for the next minute.
Yeah,
I
again,
think they can streamline that.
I think the first couple of times they play tested that, yeah, it probably had some cool gameplay, but I feel the more and more you play, it just starts you get into feel bad moments where you got to do really convoluted things to keep your rage going that just ends up not telling a great story and ends up being out of character. So
Not good.
it's definitely I feel they could have did a little bit more. Like I get the concept behind it, but I think the execution could have been a little more clear. The rules could have been a little bit better about how to keep the same theme, but not have it be as punishing or hurtful to the player.
I'll tell you, overall, I like the Barbarian. The one thing I think that's missing from the Barbarian that I wish they would have is a fighting style. And I think I understand thematically they are wild, untrained, whereas a fighting style maybe denotes that you had some kind of training. But realistically, I think if they had a fighting style, even if it was limited like the fighting styles to the Paladin where it's specific things, I think that would have added, and again, to your point of being able to be more of an offensive type of character, I think that would play well. But overall, I like the Barbarian. I think it's fun. For something that's as simple and one-dimensional, I think there is nuance to being able to play the Barbarian.
Something we don't always mention, but they tend to have really awful skill sets and are usually not as good outside of combat.
No.
It's
Well,
one of the martial classes that's a little bit harder to make work in social and exploration situations.
Well, think about it. Their main stuff is strength and con. Con has no skills. Strength has one skill.
Yeah.
I do also, the one hard part about the Barbarian also is a little bit of the skill set where you need strength, dex, and con because you're probably not having good armor. You need dex and con for your AC, but then you need strength.
They're a bit mad.
Needing 3 stats, I think it puts you a little bit lower. Plus, if you want to be intimidating, you need charisma. So I feel like the Barbarian suffers a little bit in that you need multiple stats to be good, and there's not that many stats to go
around. Brutal crit is one of the worst abilities ever.
Because crits happen so infrequently?
Oh, that and just the way it's worded. I mean, you're familiar with that. What happens if you have a greatsword and you crit with brutal crit, right?
Are you referring that even though the greatsword does 2d6 damage, you only get an extra 1d6 of damage?
Yes.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
It's absolutely terrible, stupid design
What they
philosophy.
should do is go back to what they did in 4th edition and make it a weapon damage, because that was a very elegant solution. That
Yeah,
allowed
apparently
scaling.
they wanted the Great Axe to be the iconic barbarian weapon, which I think is cool. I like
and
the
they should have
Great
made
Axe,
it 2d6.
but that's just a terrible way to do it.
Again, it seems that it suffers again from another legacy issue, as we've talked about before, that there's some things that they carry over from past editions because they feel they need to, without accurately looking at why. The Greatsword, since 3rd edition, was a 2d6 weapon, where all other two-handed weapons were a die 12 or a die 10. Inherently, then the Greatsword is always going to be better and preferred. You want to make it on par with the Maul or the Great Axe, make them all a die 12, so they're all equal.
Finally, with the subclasses, the Berserker is one of the most hated subclasses in the game, with the exhaustion being brutal as a
exhaustion
drawback.
Sucks.
And the other thing, the Totem Bear Warrior thing, is almost a no-brainer. Why would you ever pick a different barbarian class with it being just overpoweredly good, resisting everything?
All stuff.
So
and then of
subclasses
course,
are a little unbalanced, despite how they have cool subclasses like the Storm Herald and the Zealot.
I really like the Zealot.
They're very cool, but they're really in the shadow of the Totem.
I think the Zealot can stand up to the Totem Barbarian, but that's probably the only one. The Battle Rager, I'll tell you, I do like a nice combo with the Battle Rager out of the Sword Coast book, particularly if it takes away the Dwarven racial requirement, because what the Battle Rager does, it allows you to have a shield and 2-weapon fight. To attack as your action, attack as a bonus action, while still having a shield. That, I think, is fantastic. Excuse me, it's fantastic.
So my overall rating for the Barbarian, I think, is going to be a lot worse than you expected. I used to like them a bit more, and then just seeing them play more and playing with them, I felt they were just more limited than they looked. I gave it a 11 out of 13, with 13 being the worst.
Wow.
I ranked it as the 3rd worst class, which is really...
I gotta say that's too low. I think you're underestimating the fun that you can have, particularly in combat situations, or particularly for new players who are unfamiliar with role-playing, where they can have a very clear character concept of, I'm angry, I'm dumb, I hit shit, I don't care, I'm just going to go. I think there's a lot of appeal in that.
I will say, I think for new players, it probably is a little bit of a better class. I think for more experienced, like veterans, they might be a little disappointed that they can't do more with it when expecting to do more.
Right.
Next we have the Bard, one of the iconic staples of D&D, and the butt of many jokes.
Yeah.
Inspiration is a great mechanic. I think it's one of just the best mechanics in the game, and one of the best mechanics to facilitate teamwork. There's a lot of characters that get really cool abilities to make themselves cooler, and there's not a whole lot of abilities that are just pure, and again, not pure support, because you can use that on yourself, but really strong support abilities to really help out your fellow party members and help them succeed. And it's just well done and executed.
I will say, though, I like it better when you can use it on more things like damage or attack or armor class. But I don't necessarily mind that the ability to use it in different ways is tied to specific subclasses, because then it gives a little bit more of a theme boost to those subclasses. I do feel the ability is a little weak when it is just straight done on its own. But overall, I do like it, and particularly when you can combine it to use it in different ways, use it as reactions, then I think it's a pretty fun ability. Although it's also a little weak until 5th level. Having only 1 or 2 or 3 of them per long rest is incredibly short, incredibly limiting. I think then people get into a habit of saving them, always thinking they're going to need them for something bigger later. Having them come back on a short rest completely changes the dynamic of that ability and makes it extremely more useful.
If your DM gives you short rests.
That's true.
I think they're very flexible. They're very powerful. Their spell casting has, they get good spells, and at high levels, they can pick spells from other spell lists too.
That's a very cool ability.
I
wish that ability came in earlier. I wish that was an ability that you could do from the beginning of game spells. If every level you could pick one spell from a different class, I think that would have highlighted their thematic ability of being a jack of all trades and pulling secrets from everything else. There's a lot of things I feel that come in at higher levels that people either don't get to, or they just miss out on the fun that it could have at a lower level.
But overall, their spell list is not bad, though.
Nope, they got a little bit of healing. Their damage spells suck, which is a little bit of a bummer. But I will say overall,
again, they're not supposed to be damage focused. They're supposed to help other people be damage focused.
But having some damage spells would be good. I will say, 3rd edition bards sucked. Were very weak. I'm glad to see the 5th edition continue the tradition of 4th edition, another 4E praise, of making Bard strong. The 4E Bard was fantastic. The 5E Bard also very good. The skill flexibility is great. The versatility of spells, the subclasses that let you actually be a effective, melee or ranged combatant, like martial combatant. I think the Bard has a lot of fun, and obviously from a role-playing standpoint, it's hard to do better than a Bard if you want to be the face.
It's definitely, I think, it is worth to mention.
You pick a background that gives you proficiency in thieves' tools, and you have a lot of versatility in terms of being useful.
At 6th level, they get Counter Charm, the most useless ability in the game. So that is worth pointing out.
Absolutely.
Despite all this,
the action economy that is completely worthless.
Despite all this, and this could easily change and go a little bit higher, but I ranked it as number 3 of all the classes.
The top 3?
Yeah, top 3.
Wow.
And I think on a given day, it could sneak to 2nd or 1st if done well enough, and that's what you're looking for. I think it's a very great class.
It depends on the DM and the type of campaign. If your campaign it has a lot more role playing and social and even exploration encounters, yeah, it probably becomes more useful. I like the Bard a lot. I've always liked the Bard, even back when they sucked back in 3.5. But I don't know. 3 seems a little high. We'll have to see if there's other ones that come out. I mean, I could see 3, maybe 3.
So the Cleric is next. Again, they have some flexible builds with some of their subclasses. Give them the heavier armor. Others are more spellcasting focused. So they got a couple of different directions that they can go. The healing that they get is invaluable to a party. Everyone wants the Cleric to be the healer. So all around, pretty high praises for the Cleric.
Yeah.
And I don't have much criticism. I think the only criticism is that only doing the support magic can get a little boring. There's not a lot of mix-up to casting the same bless or the same support spells each combat. And, you can build a Cleric that's more damage attacking focused, but people want the support Cleric on their team, on their party and stuff. So I wish there's just a little bit more excitement to the support role. But otherwise, it is a very good class.
I would like to see, again, some more damage spells for the Cleric. I feel like you don't really get any good damaging or offensive spells until higher levels like Flame Strike or Blade Barrier or Harm, and waiting until you can cast 4th, 5th, 6th level spell slots to be able to harm the enemy. To me, is a little bit of a drawback. I think that being a support character is great, but sometimes you also want to be effective as a combatant. And just being the heal bot. I would like if they changed, and this probably goes to spells more, but if they were able to change the spells to function or have abilities that function, again, a little bit more like 4E's Healing Surge, where you could do it as just a bonus action to heal your allies and not have to use your action economy to choose between moving and casting Cure Wounds versus doing something else. I think that would have been a little bit better for the Cleric. I do like all the different subclasses between the domains. I mean, the Cleric, I think, by far has the most subclasses.
The most subclasses.
So I think that's fantastic.
And which will probably ever be growing, too.
Yeah, it should always be growing. I think that's great. I think Tasha's updated this. There was one gripe I had where 8th level, you either had where you do an extra die of damage on your melee attacks, or you added your ability modifier to cantrip damage. I think it changed now where at 8th level for all of them you could pick either one or you get both of those. I think that was a much needed change because, again, limiting the play style for any specific domain to being either a ranged caster or a frontline melee was limited and not well designed.
So for the Cleric, I think this might be a little bit biased coming off the Bard, but I actually ranked it as 4th. Seeing it very similar to the Bard being, I think, just a little bit more fun to play and a little bit better, but the Cleric has a few downsides, I feel. I do feel it is a really well-designed, well-made class, and I find that I get stuck playing the Cleric too much, but despite that, I'm never really unhappy to play the Cleric, which cannot be said about the older editions, especially 2nd edition and other ones, where it's not as fun to play the Cleric.
I will tell you the one thing I do like about the Cleric, and honestly, I think all subclasses in 5th edition could do this better, but the Cleric, I feel, gets multiple things for their domain or for their subclass, and they get it starting at 1st level, so thematically different subclass Clerics do feel different, where a lot of other classes, the subclasses does not really seem to make them feel that much different. Whereas with the Cleric, you're getting something at 1st level, sometimes multiple features at 1st level. 2nd level, you've got 2 different channel divinities. you get 6th level, 8th level. So within 8th levels, you're getting 4 or 5 different abilities to help differentiate yourself from other clerics. That's a very strong design element, opposed to something like the rogue, where you get maybe 1 ability at 3rd level and nothing again until 9th. Horrible. God, that's trash. So the cleric does shine in that their subclasses, not only is there a lot of options and thus variety, but each subclass by design gets a lot of features.
Next up, we have the Druid, and I think this is going to be a little bit of a wild tangent here to go on thing. I'm going to preference by saying I think the Druid is a very powerful class. It is a very powerful class. It's very good. I haven't ranked very low, though.
So your words don't seem to be adding up with your ranking actions.
Well, I don't like the Druid very much, despite it being a very powerful class.
What makes you think it's very powerful?
So, Wild Shape is poorly designed.
Horrible.
And through Wild Shape, they can basically have near infinite hit points and survive more than any other class in the game, potentially.
The survivability and hit points of Wild Shape is very strong, but really more so with the Circle of the Moon. The normal Wild Shape, I don't think is that strong, because while you may be able to get more hit points, your capacity to do anything else is severely limited. When you're limited by challenge rating or creatures that don't have fly or swim speeds, those creatures have very low attack, very low damage. You can cast no spells. They have almost no special features. So yes, you get hit points, but your AC sucks, and you can't do anything.
Druid is another class which is hindered by having one subclass just vastly overshadow the rest, which is a shame, because a lot of the other ones, like the Stars, the Wildfire, the Spores, are very cool ones.
Yeah, you played
I'm a big fan of.
That was very cool.
Yeah, and I really enjoy them, but it is hard to justify picking any of those when Moon exists, and Moon is so unbalanced.
Well, Moon, I don't think Moon's unbalanced. I actually think Moon is designed well, where the rest of them are maybe not designed as well. I think Moon just plays on a specific feature very well. It's very thematic within that feature. I'll tell you the problem with
this
some of
is not the take that I would have.
I'll tell you the problem I have with some of those other ones, and again, this is a weird design flaw. You know, clerics or sorcerers or something, they get their subclass at 1st level, they get bonus spells of 1st level. Druids don't get it till 2nd level, so they don't get bonus 1st level spells. It's a weird design flaw to me that could have been easily fixed and isn't. So they're getting less spells. So you look at something like the Circle of the Land, where the big thing is this expanded spell list, and it's just really not that impactful. You're missing out on 1st level spells, and 2 extra spells between 2 to 5th level. It's just not that strong.
Well, that transitions into a point I was going to get to later, but they have some of the worst spells in the game. There are a couple of standout exceptions. There's 1 or 2 really good ones that only Druids get and no one else. But overall, their spell list is pretty abysmal when you look through it. Too much concentration scattered throughout their spell list.
Almost all their spells are concentration, which is severely limiting. It also feels that, do they get spells like Fireball and Lightning Bolt? I don't think so.
Not unless you have the right subclass, so probably not.
Which again, as a nature-focused, elemental-focused type Druid, and you can't get a Fireball, a Lightning Bolt, a Cone of Cold, any of those type of things, severely limiting. If they
definitely went pretty hard on, they didn't want them to be the full offensive spellcaster, and they really wanted them to be support, but they're not as good support as clerics.
No.
So they end up with just a lot of concentration spells that are highly situational and very niche.
And if you can only do 1 concentration, you want to be a super support guy with only concentration, then they should have an ability to be able to concentrate on multiple spells of a certain level or lower. But they don't. So again, their spells, honestly, the Druid spell list in 5e should be more like the primal spell list, Druid spell list of Pathfinder 2e, which is a great spell list because it combines healing and offensive, where the Druid should straddle that kind of wizard, sorcerer, arcane, offensive magic, and then cleric define, support healing magic. Unfortunately, 5th edition, I feel it drops the ball. They don't do it.
The final comment I have about the Druid, besides I could talk about their Wild Shape being poorly designed for days, is that the proficiencies they get are very silly. Everyone seems to take issue that they are proficient with the scimitar, but not other blades because of a holdover from first audition, where Gary Gygax didn't know what a sickle was, so he just called it a scimitar, according to legend and rumors. I'm sure the comments will correct me.
This is one of the worst, silliest, stupidest things I think has been carried over.
And that's just the weapons. And then we get to the armor.
It's so dumb. The idea that they can't use metal armor or metal shields is ridiculous. the idea that, well, I want my druid to be in like hide armor and stuff, and because this image you have in your head to limit them like that is horrendous game design. First off,
I've heard defenses for them, and they're all awful.
They're
They're not great.
I haven't heard them. I guarantee they're bad. Because I'm telling you right now, here's the other thing. If the idea is that druids are all about nature, and they want to only take from nature, use the natural order, use everything in nature, why would you not use metal armor? Metal comes from ore, which comes from the ground, literally comes from the earth. In fact, an argument I think could be made to say, why would you go kill that animal to wear its skin, thus ending its life, when you could instead dig in the ground and the earth literally will give you the resource you need to make armor where no loss of natural life occurs? So the idea that, well, they can't have a metal shield, but they can wield a scimitar made entirely out of metal, that is ridiculous, stupid, and needs to absolutely change.
So,
I mean, just horrible.
It loses a lot of points just for the proficiencies alone, but also the spellcasting is bad outside of a few notable examples. And I could go on with just Wild Shape, I think, is... I feel a lot of like new players want to play the Druid, and I'm like, oh, you got to look through the monster manual and find all these different monsters and their stats, and you got to understand how having these stats is different than your base stat.
Yeah.
Like, they could have just made it like, oh, you Wild Shape, you get these simple adjustments, and then you pick a flavor kind of thing. There's other ways they could have did it where it wasn't so complicated.
The other part is
another big problem I have with it.
As you scale up, the other problem with that is when you Wild Shape, all your magic items get absorbed and don't work. So it makes it even worse. The problem is you can't use Wild Shape in combat at all unless you're a Moon Druid. And even then, if you have magical items on and now they automatically stop working because you Wild Shape, that's a horrible game design. First off, what incentive do I have to get any magic items if I'm then going to just lose them every time I Wild Shape, particularly if that's my gimmick is to Wild Shape? And why do you want a class that never gets anything then?
And I feel there's people that want to play a Druid that doesn't Wild Shape, but it's so baked into their mechanics.
Well,
you can't have the nature-loving spellcaster that doesn't Wild Shape unless you're a Cleric that picks the nature domain.
Well, and I think a Druid that doesn't Wild Shape, that would be fine. But you know what they should have? The other mechanic? Give them an animal companion. Which until, I think, recently, Tasha, you can use your Wild Shape to get a familiar. Familiars are weak and useless. They should have...
They wanted the Ranger to have something special.
I know, but again, should go back to the edition. Druids should be able to have animal companions or use Wild Shape to gain animal companions or use Wild Shape to cast a summon spell that doesn't require concentration. That would have been a much better mechanic. Having a Druid that was an elementalist that used a bunch of different spells that were elemental themed and could be, offensively focused and thus not have to use Wild Shape, that would have been fine. Neither one of those options are available.
So I ranked it as 10th out of 13.
You think the Druid is better than the Barbarian?
Yes. I put it one higher than the Barbarian.
I don't know if any of these viewers, all two of them are going to be able to take you seriously from now on.
I feel I mostly did that just because I think the Druid is a very powerful class when put together right. And
I don't know how you just told me all the reasons why it sucks.
I think it's poorly designed, but I think...
What's powerful about it?
Having a ton of hit points.
That's garbage. Again, you have no AC. You're going to get hit all the time. Be a Barbarian if you want a ton of hit points. Your rage basically effectively doubles your hit points. And you get a die 12 instead of a die 8.
We'll need to have a showdown between the Druid and the Barbarian in the future.
You.
So, Fighter is next. The most basic of the basic classics. I said it is the best second level dip in all of D&D, I would say. I'm pretty sure.
You mean like 2 level dip?
Like
take
two levels of it, multi-class with anything else.
Fighter
so its abilities are very front-loaded,
Mm-hmm.
which, is not great design, but it's good if you want to multi-class into them. I feel that the ability score increases that they have extra compared to normal classes is really lazy and really feels like they were playtesting Fighter and they put those there as a placeholder until they put in better abilities, and then they just decide to release the book as is.
It's like a holdover from 3rd edition.
It is. I mean,
so
it is a
many
holdover
legacy things that they forget the reason why it was even there.
Because at one point, feats was not like optional, and that was going to be used to get more feats.
Right.
So it still being there just looks incredibly sloppy and lazy, and like someone did not edit or playtest the player's handbook before it was released.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, in D&D Next, the maneuvers were part of the base fighter class, and then they were moved to the subclass. I think universally online, everyone hates this decision and thinks that maneuvers should be part of the base class.
It would be a very unique feature for the fighter if he had a bunch of fighting combat maneuvers.
Yeah. And also, I just think high levels for them are kind of messy. They get a third attack, they get the ASIs, they get the Indomitable. I feel, yeah, most people don't get to those high levels, but I just feel like.
I mean, those really sound good at high levels.
I feel like they just ran out of ideas, though. Like, I feel looking at the bottom half of
It's a
their
little
thing,
simplistic.
it's
Not
really
that
just
that's
don't
bad.
get too much exciting stuff.
Not that it's bad. I'll tell you, one benefit of the fighter is, again, the subclasses get multiple things. They get a third, a 7, a 10, a 15, I think an 18. That allows you that, particularly if you get to those higher levels, to really have your fighter feel different from other fighters. I think all subclasses should get more stuff more frequently so they can differentiate. So the fighter, I think, does good there. The ASI feat thing, again, if there was better feats, it would be a little bit better as well. I think maybe if they got it earlier, like instead of getting it, at 6, if they got it at second, just so that it comes online a little bit faster, considering that, again, particularly people don't play to higher levels, that can be better. The fighter is great as a 1 to maybe 3 level dip. Again, 1 level of fighter where you get a fighting style. Again, especially if you're like a monk or a paladin or a barbarian, ranger, where you either don't get a fighting style or you want to get a second fighting style. 1 level of fighter is great. You go 2 levels, you get a little heal on a short rest, you get action surge, great. You go maybe to a 3rd level, and I know you don't like the champion, but you get a little expanded crit range or something like that. But past that, the fighter, no, it's not great.
I feel the champion is very boring. I think
know.
the Battle Master is really cool in concept and seems pretty fun.
Mm-hmm.
And in the middle is a lot of very okay to decent, fairly good subclasses. So I do think the fighter.
Some of them are situational. Again, I think a lot of them suffer from the same thing that a lot of design elements of 5th edition is that you don't get enough uses of your ability to make your character actually feel different than other classes.
I think they're okay overall. I don't think they're that bad, and given that it's the most bland, generic class, I think that's actually a bit of a testament that the subclasses are as good as they are. So for the fighter, I gave it a 8. So it is still pretty towards the middle.
Yeah.
Again, it has a lot holding it back, but there's other
I feel
classes
like
that
the
have more
biggest thing
problems.
is the lack of excitement for you is what led to its low ranking.
Monk is often regarded as one of the worst classes, and also just not liked by a lot of people flavor-wise. I don't understand why people have such a issue like reflavoring the monk to fit their campaign.
I think the monk is a cool concept. I haven't played it as much as I would like. I will tell you one thing that I find to be a problem with it is the unarmed damage is very weak. I'm a little split in that I think punching someone opposed to stabbing them even with a dagger should be vastly different. Like my punch is 1d4, whereas like I get a short sword and like it should be a lot more damage to stab you with a sword than it is to punch you with my fist, even if I'm Bruce Lee. But the part that seems silly is that now there's a fighting style for the fighter where they can do a die 6 unarmed damage from level 1, or if they use 2 hands, a die 8. The monk doesn't get a die 8 unarmed until like 10th level. How are you going to have a 1st level fighter be able to do a die 8 on the unarmed? And then the monk, the master of martial hand-to-hand unarmed combat, has to wait 10 levels, a level that almost no one even plays with, to just equal a 1st level fighter? That's ridiculous. The monk should be doing a die 8 unarmed damage right out the gate.
I feel like we should both go on record that you are both big monk fans before we go deeper into the analysis.
I am pro-monk.
Something I want to say right off the bat is I think this is a little bit of a trap for newer players, because I think a lot of newer players are like you, where they want the monk to deal big damage or have high AC, and the monk is not made to do that. It is not supposed to deal big damage. It's not supposed to have high AC. It is supposed to be the midline fighter. It's supposed to skirmish around, hit people, do various special effects, be the battlefield controller.
But it doesn't even do that well. It doesn't have enough control effects.
The execution of that is a little questionable. I think it's a little underpowered.
If that's the intent, the execution's horrible.
I do think it is still pretty fun. I think having the high speed, if you're playing on a cool battle map with various different features, it can make a big difference. If you have a high speed, you can do different cool stuff.
You should always play on battle.
Don't alienate viewers.
They can play Theater of the Mind, but they're missing out on the game. They should play on a battle map. The game is built to be played on a gridded battle map.
This is getting cut. So I think it's very important to keep in mind the monk is not the same kind of martial fighter that the fighter, the ranger, and all the others are. I think that's very hard to kind of find its niche and have it do what it's supposed to do.
It's like they want it to be the rogue a little bit because they make it a die 8. Again, the monk should be a die 10, just like the ranger, the fighter, and the paladin.
Most people do agree on this. A lot of people do find that to be a holdover from the previous editions.
From third edition.
Yeah, and feel that
Not
the monk deserves to be the higher hit die.
Absolutely.
And a couple of other minor stuff bumped up a little bit.
I mean, the damage should be bumped up. Their unarmed attack should be considered a finesse weapon. They say no because they didn't want you to stack it with a rogue to be able to do sneak attack, but that's just silly. It should just be considered a finesse weapon, so that if there's other effects that affect finesse weapons, it could affect your unarmed attack. If it's supposed to be more of a controller, don't make it have to do a bonus action to disengage. Just make it that it's always disengaging, particularly because key points, Kai points, them coming back, you don't get enough of them, and if you don't take short rests, you definitely don't get enough of them. If the damage mechanic for the monk is being able to do flurry of blows to get an extra 1d4 damage, but it's contingent on having your 1 or 2 key points, and then you never take a short rest, it just doesn't come into effect enough. There's just not enough consistency of either damage, attack, or defense with the monk. And it's sad because the monk could be very cool, and while it looks like they get a lot of abilities, a lot of them don't come on until later on in levels where people don't get to, and they're highly situational, or they're just not consistently executed.
So I do want to talk about the key points as the main feature of the monk. I feel like I'm going to disagree with you here a little bit. That I think the key points are very cool. I think they're very cool. Flexible. I do think maybe they could get a little bit more. And again, certain other classes, it is very campaign dependent on how often do you take short rests.
Yes.
That will make or break the monk and make them better or worse. But I do think the key points do actually add a lot of versatility to what you do in combat.
I think so too.
And I find that to be very fun. I agree.
I think the key points are great. I think you should just get more of them. Maybe have your wisdom
for sure
plus whatever the 1 per level that it is. Have it start at first level even. Again, have it come online a little bit sooner. I think it could be better.
I just want to be clear that despite them not dealing the most damage or not having the most AC, I find them to be a very fun class because they do get a lot of options. I know you feel the options are a little underpowered,
they're versatile.
But when they come up, you feel pretty cool being able to take the extra dash or disengage or do various things. The problem also is
their subclasses are relatively weak, which hurts it again. I think the most interesting one was the one that came out, I think, in Xanatar or Tasha's. It was the one with the plague mask, the Mercy one. That one seems very thematically interesting. It seems it has the ability to do better damage. It gives you the ability to do healing. It gives you the action economy. That's cool. The other ones, though, just seem weak. The Shadow Dancer one seems weak. A lot of the others seem weak. And the other problem that you get with the monk, besides the weak subclasses and the other problems we said, is because they're all unarmored and unarmed, magic items.
Yeah,
you can't get cool armor, you can't get a cool weapon, or it's like, okay, you do get a cool weapon, it's a monk weapon, but like when you're flurry of blows, when you're doing these other things, you have to use an unarmed attack. Well, make the monk weapon the equivalent of an armored attack. Anything you can do with an unarmed attack as a monk, you should be able to do with a monk weapon. Otherwise, it's just limiting the ability to get anything cool.
The 4 element subclass is widely known as one of the worst subclasses in the entire game.
Yeah.
I feel the rest of the subclasses.
The Shadow one's worse. The Shadow one is absolute garbage.
Oh, I think a lot of people disagree with you. I think people like the Shadow one, actually.
That's trash.
I would like to see some people argue with you about the Shadow one.
It's great if you're going to role play and all you want to do is be like a ninja that's ineffectual, but like actually having any combat use, actually having like effectiveness, it's garbage.
Well, this will be a future topic of how to make a good Shadow monk, because I actually think people like the Shadow one. I think they're all just very meh and okay in general, and none of them are super exciting.
The monk is one of those things where it should be cool, but unfortunately the execution I think was poor, and I'm guessing you're going to give it a low ranking, and I'm going to have to agree.
The final thing that we can't avoid talking about is Stunning Fist. I personally think Stunning Fist is overrated.
Yeah, I think it sounds very cool. I have not used it enough. I think it sounds great. Stunning is a very powerful feature. The con save, again, stunning big monsters that have huge con probably doesn't work out so well. I think you read some statistic where a campaign did it and they only succeeded on like 3%.
A very low number.
A very small percent. That's sad. I think Stunning Fist, could be better, but I also don't know how you commit. It sounds like it should be a con save. It stuns you. That's a very powerful effect.
I just feel it's a little problematic when people try to defend the monk and they say, oh, but they get Stunning Fist. And I'm like, that doesn't make the whole class good. Like, that one feature does not save the class, sadly.
Well, and it comes on at 5th level. Why have Stunning Fist come on at 2nd level? Have these things come on earlier so that you can actually enjoy using them at earlier levels.
So lots of criticism of the monk, so my ranking is going to make no sense because,
You're
as I
ranking
said,
wow.
me and you both like the monk a lot, and
Mhm.
I had a lot of fun while playing a monk. I think a lot of the versatility made up for a lot of the on-paper weaknesses, so I actually gave it a 5.
Wow.
I know. I'm sorry to offend your senses.
I'm not sure I understand your methodology for ranking.
That's very fair.
Are you just ranking stuff you like? Are you ranking how effective they are? Are you ranking
It's a
how
mix of
useful
both.
they are?
It's a mix of both.
Yeah, I don't know how these viewers could follow along with your ranking system because it does not seem to be consistent at all.
Something we can follow is the Paladin.
Yes. Oh, the Paladin. I'll tell you right now, that should be ranked number 1. Paladin is the best freaking class. The Paladin is the most complete, self-contained class in the entire game. It has the best, situationally independent damage dealing feature in the entire game. The Paladin is fantastic.
So I agree with almost everything you're saying. Also going to point out that the subclasses are well designed and
they're good. The only thing is, I wish they got a little bit more. They only get one channel divinity option, typically 1 or 2, and then you don't get anything again until like 7th level, and then you don't get anything again until like 15th. It's a little spread out. I wish you got stuff a little bit more features and a little bit earlier on to differentiate how the different paladins would feel based off the different subclasses.
It is a little spread out mechanically. It gets a little bit of tiny points back that I think that just the flavor holds it very well, that each one is very flavorfully defined and the things, and
the different tenets help you really understand the flavor of the character, whereas in some other subclasses there's not a nice little bullet point of like, here's what it is.
Yeah. Not every class design can lean in on flavor to justify bad design, but I think the Paladin actually gets away with it a little bit just because the subclasses are so well done. My biggest criticism is that I think Smite is a terrible mechanic. I think it is overpowered.
It is definitely overpowered.
And because of it, Paladins don't get to use their spells effectively, and I would like to see Paladins that actually get to use their spells, and Smite not being tied to spell slots, and just Smite not being used as such a unbalancing mechanic.
So, first, I'm going to disagree and agree with you a little bit. So, first off, on the one hand, personal gripe, just annoyance, Smite is a little broken in the sense that they were not consistent with it throughout. A 4th and 5th level Smite does the same amount of damage. It does not progress the same. It's always annoyed me. I don't know why they've never updated that. The 5th level Smite should do 1 extra die of damage as the progression. It should do 6 die. It only does 5 die. To me, that's silly. That being said, Smite, again, is the best damage dealing ability in the game by virtue of its action economy. You can do it on every single thing. Almost every other thing in the game that gives you extra damage is once per turn, once per round. You want to sneak attack with a rogue? Great, you get to do it once. You want to go a ranger and their hunter thing? Okay, you get to do it once. You want to do something else? It's 1 time. Smite, you do it on every single attack. So if you've got 2 weapon fighting, if you've got extra attack, if you've got like a polearm master feat where you can still 2 weapon fight with a reach weapon, you can get 2 or 3 attacks in. Then again, you get hasted, whether it's from a character in your party or probably the best subclass, the Vengeance, getting haste. You haste yourself. Now you're at 3 or 4 attacks in a turn, and you can smite every single time. You take a 2-level dip in fighter and get action surge, and you get 2 more attacks on that. I mean, you could be doing 5 to 6, 7 attacks in a single turn, blow all your spells, and kill almost anything in 1 round. It is phenomenal.
Since you're supposed to have 6 to 8 encounters per long rest, I hope the next 7 encounters you're going to have a fun time having those spell slots.
Well, you have no spell slots, but you do have heavy armor, defense fighting style, probably a shield. So you start off with great armor. You go plate mail, shield, and defense fighting style. You got great armor. Your saves, adding your charisma to all your saves at 6th level, phenomenal. Healing, being able to lay on hands. The only thing that would make lay on hands better is if you can do it as a bonus action. Being able to then use that to also then cure poison disease, which almost rarely ever comes up, but is a nice little flavor thing. The Paladin is one of the most versatile, I don't know versatile even, but most self-contained. They've got good attack, good damage, good AC, good saves, healing, all of it.
The Paladin is very good at what it does, and what it does is nearly everything.
Yeah, so it wrecks stuff.
You could easily make the...
Not to mention, by being charisma-based, you can be the face. You can take all the charisma skills and now also dominate social encounters.
You could easily make the argument that the Paladin is the #1 best class in the game.
Absolutely.
But I am straight up docking at points for Smite being too good and too unbalancing and just not fair to anyone else in the party that's trying to deal damage the fair way. It is.
Hey, they've had multiple chances to fix it. They have not. So.
Yeah, if they fix Smite, I would give it the #1 spot. But as
so if they make it weaker, it would become a better class.
Yes, I think it would just be a better designed class. But
I
otherwise,
it probably would be.
I am giving it the #2 spot. And yes, it does very much deserve the #1 spot. So it's
does.
really just missing out by a hair's breadth.
And it's missing out because you're being prejudiced.
Yes, this is correct.
Which we don't promote here on this channel. We do not promote prejudices.
So the Ranger, another very often controversial class. I think if we were doing this ranking when the Player's Handbook first came out with nothing else added, it would probably be one of the worst classes ever.
You know, a lot of people say the Ranger is so bad. I don't think it's that bad, particularly from an archery style. The archery fighting style, I think, is great. You combine that with maybe some sharpshooter, maybe a crossbow expert. You're a ranger. Maybe you throw on a hunter's mark on top of that. I think the ranger can be very effective in combat from that. I mean, they suffer from some weak AC, but again, if you're a ranged character, that doesn't come up as much. You're not getting hit as much. And then they get good skills. So now on the exploration side, you know, they can be passable there and pretty good there, I think.
I think people are mostly disappointed from the 2-weapon fighting side, which, I mean, I'm sure you can tell me that being a fighter is a more effective way to be a two-weapon fighter than a ranger in most of the cases.
Yeah. I mean, well, think about it. As a fighter, you could go human variant fighter, first level, 2-weapon fighting style, the dual weapon feat, and you could be walking around in plate armor with 2 long swords, getting 2 attacks as a first level character, adding your ability modifier to the offhand attack. I mean, absolutely devastating. The ranger can't compete with that in any sense.
So I think that sets up poor expectations. I think a lot of people want to be the 2-weapon fighting ranger, and as you said, the archer is just the better way to go.
Yeah, everyone wants to be a 2-weapon fighting ranger because of Dritz from the R.A. Salvador books, and the problem is the action economy doesn't lend to it. The main damage mechanic for the ranger is the Hunter's Mark spell, which, again, a little bit of a poor design, similar to the Warlock with the Hex spell. But the big problem is you have to use a bonus action to put Hunter's Mark on. Okay, now you get extra damage. It does apply to every single attack, similar to a Smite, so there's some benefit there. But then you don't get to use your offhand to make the attack because that requires a bonus action. Well, if you kill the person, now the next turn, you're going to have to again use a bonus action to move to the next person. You thus again cannot make your offhand attack. You can go an entire battle and effectively kill a lot of creatures and never make your offhand attack, which thematically just doesn't jive well. It doesn't feel right. So the action economy of having to use Hunter's Mark to get the damage to make it viable, while also having to use your bonus action to do offhand 2-weapon fighting, I don't think lines up well.
They're very bonus action dependent, which is quite the problem. I think many of their spells, besides Hunter's Mark, also require your bonus action.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, they have the worst spells ever. The Paladin, who never uses their spells, still have better spells on their spell list than the Ranger.
Oh, absolutely.
Which again is lots of concentration and just lots of bonus actions that you don't have the action economy to use.
I mean, think of the Paladin. You get Bless, you get Divine Favor, you get Shield of Faith. I mean, those are great spells.
You get many Smite spells that you're not going to use because you're actually Smite.
Right, because those Smite spells are always worse than actually just smiting.
Destructive Wave is a very cool high-level Paladin spell.
The Aura, the Crusader's Mantle is a very cool Paladin spell. But yeah, for the Rangers, their spells, not good. And again, I think also a lot of people like the idea of kind of Aragorn, the Ranger from Lord of the Rings.
A lot of people like Rangers that don't use spells.
A spell-less Ranger, exactly.
Which the Paladin could use more spells and the Ranger could use less. So it's a little funny how that works out.
I think having a Ranger that didn't have spells, but just had the ability to put on Hunter's Mark, and probably to put it on as a free action, kind of like the Favorite Foe ability that came out in Tasha's, but the problem with Favorite Foe is you can't move it. So you put it on someone, you kill them, and now that use is completely gone. To me, that's a poor design mechanic.
We haven't talked about the most problematic part of the Ranger, and is that in the original incarnation, the favorite enemy and the favorite terrain
Horrible. Weak.
Well, I mean, if you're playing in a campaign where you're only going to be in the tundra fighting goblins, you make a ranger that's favorite terrain is tundra, favorite foe is goblins.
But it's still weak.
But again, that's
that,
super campaign dependent.
Well, and
yes, it is weak.
Did nothing.
Yeah.
It was garbage.
It is
you get what? You get a bonus to your wisdom, perception, or investigation skills. You learn the language.
You get to track them, okay?
You
get a very tiny bonus to track them.
That almost never comes up. That is just mods are in for you to be able to do that anyways. It's a garbage mechanic. I'll tell you what would have made the Ranger good is when they did the revised Ranger. Now, granted, it was probably overpowered. They had advantage on initiative. They had actual bonus damage to their favorite enemy. They ignored difficult terrain. I mean, they had advantage on saves versus their favorite enemy at high levels. That was a powerful and cool and fun Ranger, though granted, probably a little too powerful.
So I ranked it as a 7. I feel it's almost a little too generous. I feel like I should.
Would you rank the Barbarian again?
11.
Oh my God, you're so off. Who can trust your rankings? Garbage. I'm sorry. I love you, but these are garbage.
I do feel I was trying to be a little generous, saying that the Ranger's been fixed up a little bit in Tasha's and stuff.
It really hasn't though. Tasha's did not actually fix it up that much.
I feel maybe I'm just a little soft on the Ranger because I do like the Ranger as a concept. I do like the flavor. There is some cool stuff that you can do there. So I feel I'm taking a little bit of pity on the Ranger because it gets so criticized so heavily. But 7 is probably a little too generous. I will admit that.
I don't think they would ever do this because I think people love the Ranger too much as a class despite hating the class of the Ranger. But they love the idea of it. But you know what almost might be better is if the Ranger was an archetype of the fighter. If you were a fighter and then, because I think the idea is in people's mind, they want the Ranger to be like this elite special forces kind of like, near mystical, awesome type of dude. And like he's better than the common soldier. But then they make it a class so it's on level with a fighter, on level with a monk, on level with a bard. They're all equal, right? If you made the Ranger as an archetype of the fighter, where you're a fighter, but then you become a Ranger, and now you're that much of a better kind of fighter, you could condense the stuff, and I think you could make it thematically tighter, and I think it would actually be a better class that way.
I actually always want the Ranger to be a archetype of the Druid, so it's funny that we feel differently.
Well, but the Druid has a bunch of spells.
I know, you'd be a more spell heavy Ranger.
Yeah.
And you could also make the argument of the Rogue as well.
Yeah, I could see the Ranger being an archetype of the Rogue. That, I think, also, where you could take a Rogue and make it a much more martial-focused Rogue by making it a Ranger, whether melee or ranged attacks. Having no spells, the sneak attack would play right in, all the skills would play right in. It's your wilderness rogue, your ranger. That would be great.
Speaking of the rogue, that is the next class. You look like you're in pain. Yeah, one of the original iconic, well, not original.
The original was Thief, but yeah.
I'm just saying it was in like 1.5 edition is when they did it.
That's true.
But one of the oldest classes, very iconic, very well known. How does 5th edition handle the rogue? We both kind of feel not very great.
Poorly. And here's the shame. I love rogues. I like playing rogues. I think, rogues are cool. And the first class I played in 4th edition was a rogue, which I think was very fun. 3rd edition I played rogues. They're great for multi-classing. The problem with the 5th edition rogue is that it's just not that good. For one, the sneak attack, you can only do it once per turn, and you don't get extra attack. So it's an all or nothing, and I think that's a poor game design. You don't have any mechanic like a reckless attack to easily gain advantage. You don't have a fighting style that gives you some kind of bonus to attack. So you don't have any way to really make your attack better. You don't have extra attack, which gives you then 2 attacks. So you've got 1 shot to make this big attack, and if you miss, it's completely done. It should almost have like a half damage on a miss type ability, but it doesn't. So there's no consistency in being able to do your sneak attack damage. And then the problem is you're up there. You've got light armor, no shield. Until you get uncanny dodge, you have no way to basically get any more defense. You have no defense fighting style. So you're incredibly squishy. You've got lower hit points. And again, through poor game design of other kind of tank, aggro defender type classes, there's no mechanic like that. There's no marking. There's no taunting. There's no, hey, if you attack any of my allies while you're within 5 feet of me, you have disadvantage to attack them, so you have to focus on me. No, So you're the rogue, you get up there, there's no defense, you're going to get rocked, you're super squishy, and you have one shot to make a good damage hit. And if you miss, it's all gone. And honestly speaking, until you get up to like 7th, 8th, 9th level, sneak attack doesn't actually even do that much damage. You could just be pretty much any other class and do more damage more consistently while having better defense.
Minor counterpoint. They can disengage as a bonus action, letting them fill the skirmisher role that the monk tries to do as well, where they can run in, attempt their hit, hit or miss, disengage, and run away, and then not stand up there. But that is not always the best game design or fun, and it has other issues and problems.
Well, it is. As a new player, you wouldn't probably know to do that strategically. Also,
I think it should be pointed out, though, that that is an option they have, and I think it's intended that that's how they're supposed to play, but it's just not very great.
Here's the thing. I will say that being able to just do that all the time, much better than the monk, which has to use key points. Garbage. The problem, though, is you're still limited by your speed. So, again, if you take...
They don't have more speed.
They don't have more speed. If the rogue got more speed, that would be a much more viable option.
They can dash as a bonus for as well, so that is kind of neat.
They should be able to dash and disengage as a single bonus, thus making that a viable strategy, though it might be too powerful.
That does sound powerful, but
then you get your full spring attack.
That is an interesting concept, though.
What if you could? What about this bonus action? You grant disadvantage on opportunity attacks against you, so not full disengage, but disadvantage to hit you, and you can move half your speed, so like a half dash, half disengage, but combined as one bonus action. That might be an interesting mechanic that would allow the rogue to have more skirmishing playability.
I think it's important to mention too that sneak attack, that being advantage so focused, that is campaign dependent. Some DMs will give advantage out a little more freely and liberally for other reasons, and I've heard stories of DMs that will never give out advantage basically and make it very difficult to attain advantage. And just the makeup of your party, depending on your fellow party members, you might have other characters that can help you gain advantage. And if you don't have those characters, your rogue's going to be a lot weaker. So now, it kind of forces...
Counterpoint.
It forces teamwork, but in kind of a bad way, where if it's not there, you're just going to be weak.
Counterpoint, you do get to do your sneak attack by simply having an ally next to an enemy. You don't need advantage.
I always forget about that, I will admit that.
But again, if your attack's not great and you miss your one shot, again, you don't get a second attack to make it up.
And again, so that's more effective if there's a single bad guy that everyone's ganging up on. If there's an ambush and there's a lot of smaller people, it's a little bit tougher to get it so that you're next to someone else.
Yeah, you can't sing, because then the idea of like the rogue sneaking on and taking out the one dude doesn't really happen, because they can't do sneak attack because there's no ally next to that guy, and they can't get advantage on that guy. Now, some people might say hide, but the stealth rolls are not well done.
One last thing I think we should mention about the rogue is that in the past versions of the game, the skills aspect of the rogue was incredibly important.
Yeah.
They said basically you can't play the game unless someone is a rogue in your party, because you had to disable traps and do searches and stuff. But 5th has made it pretty universal that almost anyone can do that and do it almost as well as the rogue.
Absolutely.
So I feel that that's a good thing for the game in general. I feel it hurts the rogue a lot if that's something they were taking into consideration with the balance, that you really don't need the rogue to be the skill monkey nearly as much as you did it in the past.
Think of it like this. Anyone can use Thieves' Tools without proficiency, I believe, to disable devices and open locks. So you could also take backgrounds that give you proficiency in Thieves' Tools. So again, not limited to the rogue. The only way the rogue is actually better at that is if they use expertise. But then you take your 2 expertise and you have to use it on investigation and Thieves' Tools to then be really good at finding and disabling traps. But that pigeonholes you into using your 2 expertise on just those 2 skills. Dex you're probably going to be good at, but if you're not good at intelligence, you're really probably not even going to be that great at investigation. So you're not actually that great at finding traps.
And
so
again,
it doesn't. The skill aspect of the rogue is not great then.
All of this is also DM dependent, as
I feel
we're seeing more and more kind of play styles that don't involve traps and dungeons and any of the things that traditional rogues are even good at.
Right.
So if you pick the rogue that's all about disabling traps, and it's the campaign where it's all about talking to people and smooth talking, and you put all your skill points in traps and not charisma based skills, then good luck.
Well, not to mention also, how does your DM play where, okay, you failed to pick the lock. Okay, try again. Okay. And you just keep trying until you do it. Well, then what's the matter? You don't even need a bonus. If you roll enough, eventually you'll roll a 20. So, let's 2 other points about the rogue. One, I think some people might point out uncanny dodge. I feel it's a weak mechanic. It only affects 1 attack. If you've got 2 veterans next to you who can each make 3 attacks, that's 6 attacks. They could gang up, they could flank, 6 attacks on the rogue who has studded leather at best. Uncanny dodge is not saving you from that. You get resistance essentially from 1 of those hits. The rest of them are going to just obliterate you. So uncanny dodge would have been better if it actually was almost treated like the shield spell where it applies for a whole round, but it doesn't. So I don't think it's a great defense mechanism.
I do disagree. I think uncanny dodge is quite powerful. I think you underestimate even resistance from
think
a
about
single damage source.
A dragon comes, they get 2 claw attacks. Great. The first claw attack, you get resistance. The second claw attack basically takes half your health. You're done.
I think you should stop playing rogues that are putting themselves in positions to take 6 attacks.
Well, but if you don't get up in combat, they're not good at ranged attacks. No archery style. You can't get advantage on ranged attacks. Being a ranged rogue is not very good or easy. And I'll tell you the biggest problem with the rogue, I think, is their subclasses. The abilities are way too spread out. You get an ability at 3rd level and not another one until 9th. Most people don't even play till 9th level. There is almost no differentiating factor between different rogue subclasses because you get 1, maybe 2 abilities at 3rd level. I mean, just horribly poor design.
And most of them are very weak, in my opinion.
Very weak, ribbon stuff that does nothing, highly situational.
I think the rogue has some of the worst subclasses overall
Absolutely.
in the game.
And they all feel the same because, honestly, unless you're up to like 13th level, the subclasses aren't going to have enough features to make you feel different from every other rogue. Poor.
So, my ranking feels generous.
Yeah.
I gave it a 9. And
better
I feel
than the Barbarians.
No, I think, to be fair, I think the Barbarian's better than the rogue.
What do you rank as 10? Have we gotten to that yet?
The Druid is 10.
So the rogue better than the Druid?
No.
Probably.
I think I'd probably rank the Druid and the Barbarian better than the rogue.
The rogue, I think the rogue is similar to the fighter in that it's decent for like a 1-level dip. You take rogue, you take 1-level rogue, particularly if it's a 1st level, you get like stealth, thieves tools, +4 skills, you get expertise in 2 of them, and you get a little sneak attack. That's all you need. 1 level of rogue, you're good. You throw that with like 1 level of fighter for a fighting stance, or a fight style, and then you can go be anything else, and you're actually then probably very good. Then you go be a bard.
I like cunning action more than you, I think. I think having the versatility to use your bonus action in different ways is good, but I understand you feel not necessary to take the extra level for it. 2
rogue, 2 fighter, great dips, and then you go be something else to be the actual class you want to be.
This moves us to the Sorcerer. I think this is going to be a pretty quick one. I feel a lot of people online think the Sorcerer is a terrible class and is not very good.
They are
Me and
wrong.
you both very disagree with that.
They are wrong. The Sorcerer is the best offensive magical class in the game, bar none, easily.
So, Meta Magic is amazing.
Phenomenal.
And I don't understand why they took it away from all the other classes.
No.
But seeing how the Sorcerer is the only one that gets it, yeah, I think that just simply makes it one of the best spellcasters.
Sorcerer is the best spellcasting class. First, if you want to be an offensive spellcaster, it's Sorcerer, bar none, easy choice. The Warlock, the Wizard, they don't hold a candle to the Sorcerer. Absolutely not. First off, the Sorcerer gets meta magic. You get spell points. People go, oh, the Wizard gets arcane recovery. So what? The Sorcerer gets spell points. You can recover more spells through spell points than you can through arcane recovery. The Sorcerer gets meta magic. Quicken and Twin Spell are phenomenal meta magic. You take Twin Spell on a cantrip, and then you want to quicken it as well. Those 3 spells, you can hit 2 cantrips and have one of them be twinned. You go a 4th spell point, you can have 2 twinned cantrips in a turn at 5th level when they're heightened. Massive damage. Tons of flexibility to hit multiple different people, different types of stuff. And the subclasses are also better as a Sorcerer. First off, you get it at 1st level. You get something at 1st. Again, it's a little long to get it at 6th.
My only minor gripe with the Sorcerer is that the subclasses are pretty spaced out, going 1st, 6th, 14th, and that would usually hold it back. That is a bad design choice. But getting the subclass at first level does help quite a bit.
Yep.
And the subclasses are just really good. They're
better.
very flavorful.
Yeah.
And they all give pretty decent stuff.
Absolutely. People gripe that the sorcerer doesn't get enough spells, but honestly, most spells suck. You don't need that many different spells.
Yeah, the criticism is that the sorcerer does not get enough spells. I think this is ridiculous. You don't need many spells to make the sorcerer good. You pick the best spells and you specialize in doing that one thing. You don't need to have a million spells if 2 spells cover all your problems.
And especially with newer sorcerer classes, giving you the ability to maybe have more spells, or a lot of homebrews that say which subclasses you automatically learn 1 or 2 extra spells per level. That's taken care of. But
even
again,
without it, I'm happy to play the dragon sorcerer straight from the player's handbook.
Yeah.
I have no problem doing that. I see most people say oh, they could never do that because they
the
don't get enough
sorcerer
spells.
is phenomenal.
Yeah, it's great.
You get the automatic bonus to your AC. You get the bonus hit points. 6th level, you get the bonus damage. I mean, those are great features.
And I've never cried. And other people I've played with, I've never seen them cry about not having enough spells. So
no, it just doesn't come up.
It's such a weak criticism of the best spellcasting class.
Best spellcasting, offensive spellcasting class. Obviously, you're not going to be healing and supporting like a cleric, but the best.
Without a surprise, I rank this as number 1, my favorite class of D&D 5th edition.
I would put them and the sorcerer and the paladin tied for number 1. The other great thing, underrated about the sorcerer, unlike a lot of other spellcasting classes, they gain proficiency in Constitution saves,
which is massive.
Which is massively important. It means that they're better at concentration saves, whereas the wizard, the druid, so many other ones,
the people that are flooded with concentration spells,
don't get it. So, not to mention also the sorcerer, charisma based, thus allowing you to be the face of the party, allowing you to not only be effective in combat but also social encounters. Great class.
All right, this moves us to the most heated class of this whole thing. We've waited a very long time for this.
The next 2 both.
Yeah, this is the Warlock. You might be surprised, but no, I did put this as, well, we both like the flavor of this class. This class has great flavor. It has a lot of potential to be cool. I do feel this is just a awfully designed class.
Horrible.
And it feels like it is out of place in the player's handbook. It feels like an unfinished playtest, and again, I think they had a lot of really cool ideas for the Warlock that were just executed in a terrible way. You are the expert on explaining why the Warlock is terrible, so
I don't know if I'm an expert, but I'm definitely passionate. I'm passionate because I love the Warlock in concept. I loved the Warlock when it came out in 3rd edition. It was a phenomenal class. It was very fun. It was very unique. It was different. The Warlock in 4th edition, very flavorful, very fun to play. The Warlock in 5th edition, I'm probably the most passionate about this class because I'm the most disappointed in it. The design is atrocious. And the problem is there's actually good parts about it, but the bad parts are so bad that I think the Warlock is just horrible and easily the worst class in the entire game. On the good side, I believe they also get proficiency in Constitution. That's a benefit for any kind of spellcaster.
They do not.
They do not?
No.
Oh, well, then that's even worse than I thought it was.
Wisdom and Charisma. They have a invocation that gives them advantage on concentration saves, which is just as good, if not better than that. I find that to be a auto take in invocation. If you're a Warlock.
The invocations I think are awesome. I would love to see more have that. I would love for the wizards to have an invocation similar to the kind of permanent spells that you could do back in 3rd edition by spending XP, and you could permanently cast stuff on yourself. I feel like that's what the Warlock invocations are. I would love to see other spellcasting classes be able to have a version of that, but maybe more themed. Again, you're a cleric, and you can take invocations that are permanent blessings you have on yourself. I think that would be very flavorful and cool. So that mechanic on the Warlock, very, very cool. Eldritch Blast, obviously best cantrip in the game because it's a die 10 damage. You can do multiple attacks, which when coupled with Agonizing Blast, where you add your ability modifier, gives you the highest and most consistent damage output for a cantrip.
I'm going to counterpoint. I think Eldritch Blast is a little overrated, to be honest. And I think if you don't take the invocation, there are other cantrips that are pretty comparable. And you have to use up those invocations to make it more powerful when you could use those invocations on other creative stuff.
Well, you only need one.
So I do feel it's a little overrated.
You take Eldritch Blast and you take Agonizing Blast. Now Eldritch Blast is the best cantrip.
But I feel it's by a small enough margin that even if you don't take it, You could still survive.
I don't think so. Think about it. You're a 5th level caster. You have an 18 charisma. You're doing 2d10 plus 8. So you're doing what? 10 to 28 points of damage. If you're doing Firebolt, the next highest dealing cantrip, you're doing 2d10. So you're doing 2 to 20 points. So would you rather be 10 to 28 or 2 to 20? And it only scales higher when you get to 11th level and 17th level. Not to mention the fact that you make multiple attacks means there's multiple opportunities to miss, there's also multiple opportunities for critical hits. The multiple attack is a benefit. It also gives flexibility that you could shoot 2 bolts at different people, thus potentially killing multiple people. That's the benefit of it, is that it's different individual bolts, where all the other cantrips is 1 bolt or 1 save, and it scales the damage up. So, best cantrip.
So why is the Warlock bad, though?
The reason it's so horrible is that, one, it cannot be a frontline fighter. Okay, it doesn't. You have to take a Pacted Blade and an Invocation just to get extra attack. You don't have good armor class. I don't even think they're not proficient in shields. You don't get any kind of like defense fighting style or anything else that would give you defense. You're a die 8, so you cannot be a frontline fighter.
You're excluding the Hexblade from this equation, right?
I guess because they get better armor and shields, but still, medium armor sucks. You're either light armor with a ton of dex or your plate mail. Medium armor sucks. It comes to a lower AC. So that's a problem. It's difficult, requires a lot of resources to be a viable frontline fighter then. So then the other side is to be a spellcaster. Okay, you have no spells. I like the idea that they're trying to do something different with the spells. Short rest. Our short rest is too long. It happens way too infrequently. And even if it was even every 10 minutes as a short rest, 2 spells up until 10th level is atrocious. You will run out of those immediately. Particularly because the main damaging effect and mechanic of the Warlock is the Hex spell, which ties specifically into the Eldritch Blast cantrip, because Hex adds the damage to every attack, and Eldritch Blast by 5th level does 2 separate attacks, so you do Hex damage on each one of them. Well, that means you have to cast Hex. That's a spell right there, gone. So you have one other spell you can do, and if you don't take another short rest, what are we talking about here? You could literally, in the first 2 rounds of the first combat, be out of all your spells and be doing what? You're just Eldritch Blasting all day. You might as well be a ranger with an archery fighting style to get a +2 to your AC, take sharpshooter, take a -5, +10 to damage with no cover penalties, and just sharpshoot all day. You'd be a better archer than the Warlock. So the Warlock can't be frontline, can't be an archer, doesn't have enough spell slots. It wants to be cool, and it falls short in every conceivable way.
I don't think it is quite as weak as you say it is, but it does have a lot of features that don't work as well together as
2
it should.
spells. I mean, just look at what is of any other full spellcasting class at 9th level. How many total spell slots do they have?
I think you are
way more than 2. Way more than 2. They've got 4 first level spells, 3 seconds, 3 thirds, 3 fourths, 2 fifths. What are we talking about? 15, 16, 20 spell slots versus 2? There's no way you could take a short rest after. You would literally have to take a short rest in the middle of every combat to stay up with the spells. And the fact that the spells scale up doesn't matter. You're done after 1 or 2 spells. And again, particularly that you have to use Hex to really make it viable, it's garbage. The spellcasting component makes it absolutely garbage, which is a shame because the evocations are cool and the thematic essence of it is very cool, but the execution from a mechanical standpoint with getting 2 spells is unplayable. And anyone thinks the Hexblade is so strong? I don't see it. I mean, I'd be glad to put up and make just about any other class that would be better on armor class, saving throws, attack, damage than a Hexblade. What do you get as a Hexblade? You're gonna smite? That'd be a Paladin. You could smite way more often. First off, the Warlock smiting, you can only do it once per round, not like the Paladin smiting. Okay, and you have only 2 spell slots, so you're going to use it up immediately and be done. Okay, you don't get good armor, so a fighter or a Paladin has better armor class across the board. Paladin, better saves. Fighter, action surge, fighting style, even the champion, expanded crit range, all that makes you a better frontline fighter. So the Hexblade, where do you get? You get a curse. Okay, here's the problem with the curse. Unlike Hex, when the person dies, you don't get to move it. So again, you can do it once per short rest. You don't take a short rest. You put that one hex on. Oh, sorry, you hexed the weak goblin. Yeah, you killed him with your first hit. He's dead. Your hex is gone. It's useless now. Oh, big bad guy. Nope, you got nothing to do for him. The mechanics are bad. It's way too infrequent of mechanics.
Clearly, you could talk about the Warlock.
I could. I'm sorry,
day.
I'm taking too much time.
I do have one question.
Sure.
Do you have any opinion on the Pact Boons, which are almost as a second subclass for the Warlock?
Yeah, they're interesting. They're cool. I mean, again, I remember you did one with the Book of Shadow where you got a lot of extra cantrips, added a lot of versatility. Cantrips I think are very cool, particularly they scale well in damage. The familiar one I think is weak because familiars in general are very weak. The only one that is useful is you take you can get a.
You get imps, a pseudo dragon,
The only one is good is a pseudo dragon because it gives you magic advantage, magic resistance. So you can literally be like first level or second or third, whatever it is. Get a pseudo dragon, have it sit on your shoulder, and now you have advantage in all saving throws versus spells. Other than that, every other familiar worthless. Familiars are garbage. The Pact of the Chain, so that's the familiar one, right? The Pact of the Blade, okay, great, you get a blade.
I feel the blade is a little weak, and a lot of people feel that the Hexblade should have just been the Pact of the Blade.
Yeah, the blade's a little weak because it's limiting on what magic items you can kind of make as your Pact Blade or what evocations maybe affect your Pact Blade. They came out with, I think in Xanatar, some extra evocations to help the Pact Blade. They did one where you can do longbows but not crossbows, and I think it was just purposely to pimp so you can't do crossbow expert on it.
I actually highly consider doing a Pact of the Blade with a longbow.
It'd be better if you could do it with a hand crossbow, but you specifically can't, which is stupid. You could do it with a heavy crossbow, a longbow, a short bow, a light crossbow, but not a hand crossbow.
Because hand crossbows are stupid.
No, it's just they wanted to pimp out the crossbow expert, which is silly. What are the other ones there? The Talisman?
Pact of the Talisman, that's from Tasha's. It's brand new.
Yeah, I mean, that's okay. I mean, the man that's cool hammer and give you this little charm is going to kind of protect you, but how often is that really coming up? I don't know. It doesn't seem. It doesn't, like most things in 5th edition, they don't feel like they provide enough of a benefit consistently to actually feel like it's a meaningful difference from anything else.
So my ranking of the Warlock of the 13 classes is I put
14.
it
Worse than whatever the next class is going to come out with.
I put it as a 12.
What do you think is worse than the Warlock?
The Wizard.
Yes, the Wizard.
I honestly think, and everyone thinks the Wizard's the best class.
Yeah,
I think the Wizard is even worse than the Warlock, and it's very fair that you disagree, but I really hate the Wizard. I think it is immensely disappointing. I think they get a lot of nothing. I think their subclasses do a lot of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I think them having a wider spell selection is
it's
it's total trap. It's not worth anything. Pick a Sorcerer, get your 2 good spells. You don't need to be a Wizard that has 20 different spells so that you can prepare the really niche role play spell that you're going to prepare the next day to, get out of a niching thing that any other class can just do normally.
Yeah.
I think the Wizard is terrible. I think it's overrated, and I had to put it as the worst class.
I agree with you pretty much wholeheartedly. I would still put the Warlock as worse than the Wizard. I think that the way I feel about the Warlock is the way you feel about the Wizard, is that you love the Wizard, and thus you were so disappointed with its execution, you put it as the worst. Same with me with the Warlock. I love the Warlock, so disappointed with its execution, I put it as the worst. But I agree with you. The Wizard, the subclasses are very weak. Oh, you get to copy spells in your spellbook for less gold. And a lot of DMs, I think, don't even track that. That never comes up.
And
it's
again,
garbage.
Apparently the belief is that the Wizard is good by itself, but it's not. It's not. It gets nothing.
No.
All it gets is more spells, and the spells are not any.
Well, no, it doesn't even get more spell slots. You have the ability to prepare more spells. You know what's better than that? The Druid and the Cleric, because they literally get every single spell on their list. So they trump the Wizard by 100 times. And this idea that, they have access to prepare more spells is incredibly not useful. When do you know exactly what you're going to be going into and know the perfect spell? No. It's, hey, I'm walking down the road. Oh, there's bandits that ambush me. Sorry, bandits, hang on a second. Let me go back to the inn. Let me rest. Let me prepare a different spell. Let me come back out here, and then you can ambush me, but I'm going to have the right spell prepared. No, that's ridiculous. That never happens. Oh, I'm going into a dungeon. Well, what's the dungeon look like? I don't know. There's no map. Go explore it. Oh, you know what? I know exactly what the dungeon looks like. I know the exact spell to memorize. No, that never comes up. So this idea that you're going to have access to all these other spells, you don't actually have access to them. If you didn't have to prepare your spells and you say every spell in your spell book is prepared, maybe then. But otherwise, no.
I'm sure someone could tell me differently, but I don't think there's any spell that is wizard only that no one else gets that is that good and amazing that like makes the wizard broken.
No.
And especially now with every class having various subclasses that eventually give them access to any spell really. Like if you want a certain spell, there's probably a subclass that can get you access to that spell. So
No.
yeah, I think the wizard is incredibly overrated and disappointing and nowhere near as
the
good as
wizard
people
should be
say.
cool and powerful, but it's not. Again, there should be like one spellcaster, the mage. You could combine the wizard, the sorcerer, and the warlock, put it all together, be a freaking mage, get meta magic, get invocations, and then be able to cast spells. There's your offensive spellcaster. And that would be a cool and flavorful with a lot of depth, but they split into 3 different classes, and while the sorcerer is awesome, the warlock sucks, and the wizard sucks.
Any final parting words on the 13 classes of D&D 5th edition?
Yes. While I've said a lot of negative things about 5th edition, I still very much enjoy it. I actually don't think that much. I'm not that negative towards 5th edition, though I do think that 4th doesn't get enough love. Do need to say that. But 5th edition is still very fun to play. I love what 5th edition has done to expand the fan base, to bring more people into D&D. And while I highly criticize the design elements of all this, 5th edition still has done a very good job. And the only reason I criticize is because I love it so much.
Well said.